add favorites, learn how to find your T codes, learn how to play around with those tabs, create new sessions, /O/N, and all that. Gradually, you will keep getting familiar. Now, the journey has started. We are just take, we took the first two classes just to give you some basics about, um, key terminologies you need to be familiar with, how to navigate through the system. And now, let's now go into the journey itself. Just a minute, let me turn my lights. It's getting dark here already. All right. So, yeah. So before you start learning SAP, we have said you have to understand. We have talked about the structure generally in SAP. Now we're not now looking at FICO. We have not taken our time to talk about finance. We have talked about the history of SAP. We have talked generally about services, about the architecture, the environments, careers in SAP, you know. So for the next, from now on, we're now going to be focusing on the topic FICO and the structure behind it. The best way to understand SAP is to understand the structure of that module, because every module has the way it has been designed to work. Now let's talk about FICO as a module so that you kind of have that solid foundation as to what you're getting into. SAP FICO is a module in the SAP S/4HANA or ERP, which is used for financial reporting, both externally and internally. So it's used majorly, not just for financial reporting, but I think financial reporting is the end product. But before financial reporting, basically managing finance operations. So from selling to procuring to expense to cost to profit centers to all that around making sure that the right structures are in the business to be able to give you that financial reporting you need. The objective is to record all financial transactions. Remember the word financial. So we don't record non-financial transactions like phone calls or you know things like negotiations, contracts, formal agreements and all that. No. What we record in FICU are financial transactions. So transactions that have monetary value, that are posted by an entity and produce financial statements that are accurate at the end of a financial period. Not just accurate, but in line with what we call IAS and IFRS. I think I'll explain that. And I think these are concepts, you need to also research about. Now, for every profession, for every career, there are bodies, there are standards, there are procedures on how to do what you're doing. In the medical field, they have medical laws, standards, and procedures on how they should work. In engineering, they have physics, law of this, law of that, policies, standards, best practices that drives the way they do engineering. Same with finance. In finance, we have international best practices, we have standards, we have rules, we have principles that guide the way we do our transactions. So those principles also are applied when we use the system. So one of them is the International Financial Reporting Standards, which we call IFRS, which is also part of the International Accounting Standards. We also have local laws or local standards within countries. So we have country-specific laws on how you should report or do your transactions. We also have international standards. So all these standards drive the way we record and report transactions. So we don't just do anything in the system. We are guided by principles, by laws, by standards on how things should work within the system. So it's important, you read about these things, refresh your memory about them because they also are aligned with how we do work in the system. Very, very important. Okay, so and that is what you can use to make sure that they are accurate. Accuracy is benchmark with something. So for you to say something is accurate, it means you have benchmarked it with laws, principles, policies to be sure that it's accurate because it's complying with certain laws and certain standards. FICO means financial accounting and controlling, which is the bedrock of functional modules. ABAP is the bedrock of technical modules. Finance is the foundation of functional modules. So whether there is sales and distribution, materials management, project systems, all these modules have must must integrate with finance because finance is the foundation. Because the most important thing really for companies is to produce financial records. Like I said, every company is required to account to the government, account to the shareholders, account to the internal stakeholders, because business is an entity on its own. The only way you can account is when you have set up a system that can report what you have done financially. We also have management accounts that also uses both financial and non-financial transactions to come up with what those accounts are. But financial reporting um, only records financial transactions. So that's the full meaning of FICO, financial accounting and controlling. Now let's look at the financial accounting module itself. The FI, which we call FI, is used for both internal and external reporting. You also have reports like your financial statements, your financial position, your profit and loss. These are all standard reports that are already in the system, but you need to activate them. We also have FICO integrating with other modules like sales and distribution, controlling, production planning. So, but the most important thing is if you pick a financial accounting module, you're going to see sub-modules in them. You're going to see accounts receivable and accounts payable, general ledger accounting, asset accounting, banking. These are some modules that are sub-modules of finance. Although we're not doing everything, we cannot do everything. For each of these modules, you have consultants or super users that man them. But we are going to be looking at the core modules we have in finance. Also, finance is integrated with other modules in SAP. Tightly integrated. There are integration points between finance, for example, and materials management. There are integration. Integration means when the flow of transaction between those modules, which basically sits in the GL side. But we'll look at the integration fully in the technical training. But the most important thing is for transaction to flow between, for example, if we have the procurement department and we have finance. Procurement department is separate from finance, but in terms of um, where do they integrate? At what point do they establish that relationship between both parties? It's at the point of when the nature of transactions that procurement do. For example, the procurement team has, like I said, separate process. They can do quotation, they do contracts, they source for vendors, they do a lot of things. They manage warehouse and all that. However, at the point as they do their work, at some point they will need the finance team to support them. But for finance team to support them, they will need to pass information to the finance team. And that's the essence of integration. So let's say, for example, this is procurement. Let me explain this so that you can really understand where these things are. This is the procurement guy. This is the finance guy. Now, this guy is, so let's say procurement, this is finance. These two work separately. In an organization, you have procurement department and you have the finance department. These two are separate. Within the organization, they have separate roles and responsibilities. So let me ask, what do you think? What are the top things that the procurement department does? Anybody? 2, 3, 4 items.
They deal with
The source to
they deal
pay.
with
So the source to pay.
No, not terminology. What do they do? Simple, just simple. What do you think the procurement does? Don't give me jargon.
Okay, I think the source of vendors and the um and then they made a purchase order, and then
Not even purchase.
yeah, purchase, yeah, and then they
It's my
of
biro.
course they pay yeah, goods received, no, not goods,
Purchase. Mm-hmm. Any other person? Any other person? Any other person? What does the procurement department do?
the
Can
purchase
you
the
guys? Can you
goods
guys?
for use in the company, also payment. They issue the invoices too.
Purchase. They source. They purchase. They issue invoice.
They do payments.
Oh. Mm. Okay. Very interesting. But it is not totally correct. Yeah, I think it depends. I won't say it's not totally. It depends on your experience, your exposure, the kind of environment you have worked with, and what you have seen in a typical company that has a
That's
very good structure. Yes. So it depends. In some smaller companies, procurement pay. In some other companies, procurement don't. But finance, what do you think finance do? Let me now go to that place. What do you think a finance department will be doing?
recording of transactions, setting
Okay.
up accounts, reporting, preparation of financial statements, reconciliation.
Let's
Like,
just say reporting.
okay,
I don't want to go too far because I'm looking at it with the
to the
finance
details.
now.
Okay. Hmm.
Yeah, so let's say record transactions and reporting. Now, the truth is that in an ideal space, the
Hmm.
procurement guys will need the finance guys. When do you think the procurement guy will need the finance people? Where do you think they will need to shake hands? Do you think they ever will need each other?
Always, they know, they do.
Why? Where? How would
At
they
the
need each
at the
other?
point of payment and recording, the finance
Okay.
people, payment and recording.
Well, the procurement person is not concerned about your recording.
No, they record
Payment.
too.
No, they
Okay.
are not. the procurement person does not care whether finance records or not. I think the most important thing is, well, they will care. I
Payment.
think I agree with you. They will care at some point. So let's say recording. Now, this is what happens. And thank you for sharing your thoughts. Now, the question is, before finance pays, what do they need to pay? Because finance cannot just pay like that. What
They
would
need
trigger
the
them to look?
invoice. They need the invoice.
Hmm.
Evidence that the goods have been supplied. You know, there will be verification that goods have been supplied. But they need the invoice, the critical document, they need the invoice.
So they need the invoice from the supplier or from the
Yes.
procurement department to pay. Good.
Mm.
Now, this is an example, and before they get invoice, how will what other thing will interest the finance team before they get invoice? What other thing do you think the procurement team does that the finance team needs to be aware of? So one thing that they will need to is delivery.
Goods receive notes. There will be goods receive
Yes.
notes.
Or what we call the GRN, goods receive notes. So the idea is, and this is just trying to break it down so that even some of us who don't have this deep understanding about business will understand how this works. So the procurement department is a department on its own, doing its own thing. The finance department is a department on its own, doing its own thing. But at some point, both of them will need each other. And this is what integration is all about. Integration is where they shake hands, where they now will need to work together. Now, I don't want to go into deep details, but in a typical procurement scenario, the procurement department, like you said, will source for the vendor. They will raise quotation, they will raise PO, and then the supplier, depending on the contract and the terms of the arrangement, supplier will supply the items to the procurement team, but the procurement team will need to move those items into a warehouse, depending on the kind of items. So there's warehouse team. Now, that concerns finance because once those physical things, those physical items, let's say we're procuring parts, spare parts. Please mute your mic, Mr. Mike. Don't forget, mute your mic, please. So let's say we are procuring spare parts. The vendor has sourced for the procurement team has sourced for the vendor, does the purchase. They have now received the spare parts inside our warehouse. That concerns finance because those spare parts that are sitting in our warehouse have come into the business and it's an asset. Finance are concerned with all the assets that are in the business, whether they are inventory items, spare parts, physical. So finance is interested in those assets because those assets have financial value. That's why finance is interested. Remember, financial accounting is about recording financial transaction. So any financial value that hits the business, finance is interested. And finance will ask for the delivery notes to make sure that what was raised in the PO, let's say, for example, the PO, they say we want to supply 10 spare parts. Finance needs to be sure that it is 10 spare parts that hit our warehouse because that 10 spare parts have a value of maybe £10,000. And this £10,000 is financial value. And the finance department is interested in anything that has financial value. Secondly, once the spare part is delivered, it most times is delivered with an invoice. So the supplier who supplied the parts will send invoice. Why? Because they want to be paid. The supplier wants And that invoice is an evidence that we have delivered, and this is the value of our spare parts. And that invoice has financial obligation. Again, finance is interested in anything that has financial value and obligation. So what does the procurement team do? The procurement team does not have the capacity in most structured business. Procurement team does not have the financial capacity to pay any vendor because they don't have access to financial wealth of the business. They don't have access to financial assets. They only have access to procurement assets. So procurement cannot pay because they cannot procure and pay at the same time, and they don't have the financial assets to pay. Financial assets sits with the finance team. So the vendor will be will submit the invoice to the procurement because those are the two people that did business. The procurement team needs to forward that invoice to finance for finance to now pay. So the supplier will be chasing the procurement team. If payment has not been made, the procurement team does not know finance. They know the supplier does not know finance. They know procurement team. So the supplier will be chasing the procurement team to pay. Procurement team will be chasing finance to release the payment. Before finance pays, finance will check. There's what we call two-way, three-way, and four-way checks. The finance will check, for example, in three-way check, finance will check whether the PO, the quantity in the PO matches the quantity in the GRN and matches the quantity in the invoice. Three-way match. Three-way check. So finance will do these checks. Once it has checked and it's validated that everything is correct, finance will now release payment. So you see, the first interaction between finance and procurement is GRN, because that's the first time that financial value came into the business when those parts were delivered. So GRN is what GRN triggers finance interest in what has entered the business. So that is the integration point between procurement and finance, GRN, because anything that has financial value that comes into the business, finance is, or leaves the business, finance is interested, and that's the integration point. The second integration point is when procurement sends the invoice to finance. Now they are curious because we want to check whether indeed what is in the invoice is the same as PO, is the same as GRN. The third integration between finance and procurement is the payment, when they finally pay that value to the invoice, or the value of the invoice, because it creates a chain of transaction. Because before we paid, the supplier we were indebted to the supplier. So we were owing the supplier some money, and that created a liability for us before we paid. So in our books, we were owing. So when we pay, we cancel our debts. And the procurement team needs to be aware that we have paid and we have canceled our debt with this supplier. And that is where recording of transaction comes in, because at the end of the day, when we pay, we give a payment advice to the supplier to say, look, oh, we have paid, oh. So we call it a payment advice. We have paid your money. And they also inform the procurement team to let them know that they have also paid, so that that relationship ends. So this just gives you an idea of how modules are integrated and how they talk to each other. And that is the concept of intermodal integration. And it's a major part in finance, in FICO, because why FICO is also a very big module, and why it's also very important. So if I go to OBYC, for example, which is the integration point between finance and material management. This is the integration point between finance and MM. And you're going to see some key activities that happen, but this is one that is my interest. If you look at inventory posting, so here we're supposed to tell the system when we're posting inventory, when we receive the inventory, what GL account. I don't want to go into those deep details, but just know that in the system, there are integration points. Let me not go, it's too early. So just know that in every module in SAP, there is an integration point between finance and that module. And you have to map that integration point as part of your configuration and design. There's integration point between finance and every module in SAP, whether it's quality system, whether it's HR, whether it's sales, every module in SAP that has financial implication have integration with finance. So that's why finance accountants are the busiest outside the technical guys. They are the busiest because, I mean, everything sits on them. So every module might complete their config and start waiting for you for integration, because it's only when the integration happens they can finally say they have UAT successful, testing is complete. But in the system, this thing I just talked about, in the system, you have to map them. You have to let the system know the integration between both of them. So this is just explaining briefly why we have integrations across modules. And I think very soon there is also another course that focuses on just integrations between finance and probably all the standard modules in SAP. Hopefully, we will get a little bit of it in the technical training, but there's a course that I will soon push out there that will look at integrations across finance and across all modules. It will soon be out. So just look out for it, and it will help for you to also learn that as you go. But SAP is deep, very deep. But the learning is gradual, but understand the concept. I'll break it down as easy as you can so that you can understand and appreciate how it works. So that's why we say finance integration with other modules. That's an example. So you see all these modules, they must speak to finance and controlling. That's why finance is the biggest functional module you have in SAP. And that's where most of the opportunities are within the SAP environment. Now, let's look at how SAP complies with international accounting standards. Like I said, it's one of the laws that guides how we do our work within the system. It provides all the components of financial statements. So, for example, SAP gives you statement of financial position that shows how the business is faring. So, like I said, one of the idea of a business is business is seen as a separate legal entity, as an individual on its own that needs to account to people that have invested into it. Just for example, when you were a child or when you were growing up, when your parents were investing in you, they took you to school, they paid for your school fees, you had to account to them how you are faring in school and how you are doing, how you're, coming up, and how maybe when you get your school results, you have to take it back to them and say, this is how I've performed. That's exactly how we see business. Business is people invest in it, and the business needs to come back and say, this is how we have managed the funds and investments. But business does not speak. So the custodians, the accountants, the CFOs, everybody, CEO, everybody will have to manage the business and account on behalf of the business. So one of the ways business account is they give reports in different forms. One of those reports they give is the financial position. Another report they give is a statement of profit and loss and other comprehensive income. Another report they give to stakeholders and shareholders is the statement of changes in equity, statement of cash flow. These are all documentations that they give back to report how business operation has been delivered. Now, any questions at this point? We're almost wrapping up. Okay, no questions. Now, before we now again looking at, we have talked about the concept of integration. Go ahead, Evie, briefly.
Yeah, just briefly, you mentioned when it comes to the models here, there was something I saw there was the plant maintenance. Is it
Yes.
specifically for this model is for SAP alone or what?
Plant maintenance is, it's a module in SAP, but it's also a physical thing that happens in every company, right? If you have a company that has a lot of plants, in plants, I mean, it could be, a production facility, it could be generators, it could be even trains, So plants are basically assets that are used to run the business. If, for
Okay.
example, yes, for example, in the train industry, your trains, they are like plants because they are used to carry people from one location to another. It's a service, but those services are run by plants. Even those rail tracks, the generating the power that goes into moving those trains and making it break, all those stuff are all plants. And you have to maintain them, right? So there is a module in SAP that maintains plants.
Great. Okay.
So plant maintenance is also a different module. That's why SAP is very deep and very wide. You cannot do everything. There is also project system, just like you have project management tools like Microsoft Project, Oracle Primavera, MS, and other project tools. OSOP also has tools they use to manage projects within the system. If your company is into implementing projects, let's say your company is into construction and you want to use the project management solution in SAP to manage your end-to-end project work, just like the way we did project plan on Excel. You can do a project plan in SAP also. That sits under project systems. But all that flows down to finance. Yes, SAP is very deep. We have other modules you have never heard about. We have, yeah, we have crazy modules. We have modules that talks about. We have SAP that talks about climate change. It talks about. I've forgotten where I listed out most of those stuff now. But yeah, we have a lot of modules in SAP that people don't even. Sometimes you see them, but people who specialize in that, well, if they are lucky and they're lucky to to land jobs in those areas. But we have modules that are very rare, but are existing in SAP. A lot of them. There are some you see online that, wow, is this a module in SAP? Yes. So I can't list them out, but there are a lot of modules. Of course, you have heard of SAP Joes, which is the AI bit. People are consultants there. So there's a lot. Okay, so back to our making sure. So SAP is complying to most of these international best standards. Now let's look at the structure, and this is where the config starts. Like I said, when you understand the structure, you understand how things. For example, you now know that there's client, there's company code, there are other objects that work with the company code. There is controlling area, which we are going to see very briefly. So SAP defines enterprise structure as a definition of specific organizational units. So all those things we talked about, profit center, cost centers, they are all called organizational units. So the structure is how you understand business requirements and how you arrange those organizational units to be able to meet up with the client's requirements. That is configuration. Configuration is not about just going inside there and just no. Configuration is understanding the business units and now knowing how to place them, how to set them up so that they can deliver that value that the business wants. That is configuration. But when they teach you configuration, they just make you believe, oh, go in, put this. No, no, no. That's not how. That's why many people are confused, and a lot of people don't. In the SAP community, we have a lot of SAP consultants, but very few really understand what SAP is. I would probably say 3-4%. And those ones always get SAP jobs, whether the market is saturated or not, because by the time you interview them and they explain concepts, you don't even stand a chance. So that's why, and when they say there are no jobs in SAP, yeah, I'm not bothered because, I mean, we're still learning, but we understand some of those basics. So it all starts with how do you bring organizational units together? And how do you build based on the functional design document? First, you have to understand what these organizational objects mean in SAP. 2, you have to understand what it means in business context. 3, you have to put it in a functional design document so that the functional consultants can now design the system based on the interpretation of business needs. That is why, that's why I love the feedback and the questions you guys were asking about those concepts, because what Mike knows profit center, that word profit center to him might mean something else because of his background. To Evie, it will mean something else. To you, to me, it means something else. But to SAP, it also means something else. So you need to understand what that concept means in SAP, understand what it means in business context, so that when you're engaging with the business, because business does not know SAP terminology. That's one thing that you will find when you go into the market, into the job market, and when you get into projects. It is a job of the functional consultant and the BA to guide the business into what SAP is. So the business can come, and that's why we talk about prioritization. We talk about translating these business requirements into technical specifications. The business will come and start explaining something to you that means segments. Meanwhile, they are referring to business area, or they're referring to cost centers. So you need to be very careful that and it is you that will guide them to say, oh no, this what you're trying to explain is supposed to be in segments, and we will use that segment in SAP to deliver on this requirement. You see why you see why it's all difficult. You see where the difficulty is. It's not in configuring system. Configuring system, anybody can just go and learn and use T code and just be putting things together. That's not what configuration is. The difficult part of configuration is understanding business requirements, understanding SAP requirements, and aligning those two. That is where a lot of people are not there. A lot of people are on one side, or just, design system, just configure. But they don't understand what they are doing. They're just putting things together. That's why by the time they finish configuration, it's a mess. Because when they play it back to the business say, but we said this, but this is what we are seeing. This is not what we want. It's crazy, but that is the root cause of those kind of misalignment, is when people don't understand what the business wants. The business don't know what SAP is, so it's not their fault. It is you, who is a functional consultant, who knows SAP. They're supposed to explain to them. But you cannot, because you yourself you don't also understand what this concept is. You just know that you can configure system, but you cannot interpret the SAP language in a business sense. That's where a lot of people fail. For you to be able to interpret that, you need to understand the architecture. You need to understand what makes SAP SAP. How is it? What's the structure? Which of those organizational elements need to come together to deliver on what they want? And that's where enterprise structure comes in. And SAP is not SAP without organizational object. You see, this organizational object is what SAP builds their system on. That is the structure. That is the foundation of SAP. SAP is not SAP without organizational objects. So you see the word SAP, for me, is not SAP. For me, it's understanding what these organizational objects are and how I'm able to use it, how I'm able to understand it in SAP context and interpret it in a way that the business understands, and align those two together to be able to now design the system. But this is very deep because not everybody teaches SAP. Like, we're very, very, very few. I'm not bragging, but we're very, very few that really understand, because I've also submitted myself to learning. I've learned from others. I've seen people's video. I've listened to other people, but I can tell you that it's very few who can interpret this in this form, because I'm also somebody who has sat on both sides, and I've really seen how the value that these two this brings. And this is why a lot of people too really get opportunities. They don't understand the basics, the intricacies that goes into designing a system. It's just config, config, config. But config is nothing more than bringing the organizational units together. But before you bring them together, you need to understand how and why they are existing in the first place. So just like you're seeing in my screen, a building that was put together, and you see the foundation, the groundwork, the building services, the roof, all these things, before you see the precision that architects and building construction people put into building a house, the precision, the everything follows a structured approach. Everything means something to them. The door needs to be put in a certain measurement. The foundation needs to have a certain level of everything has detail. What define those details is their laws and their standards, construction standards. They are same we have in finance and SAP. There are processes, laws that should guide how we design a system. How many functional consultants in FICO even know IFRS in the first place? How many? These guys, most people just jump into it and just start building stuff. How many can interpret international best practices and international reporting standards to what they are designing? It's not there. So you have people building system that is not in compliance, that does not comply with international best practices. Unfortunately, that's what we have, because people just feel that configuring system is just learning T codes and just knowing and just configuring things. It's far, far deeper than that. And so when I see construction work and the precision that goes into doing what they do, and I bring it back and I see that we have a lot to learn in the construction industry, how we put organizational units together. Why these are called, all these roof, building services, ceiling, of course, they have their terminology in construction. As we have what we call organizational objects, and it is when you put them together in line with best practice, in line with international financial reporting standards, in line with local regulations, in line with understanding business requirements, in line with understanding understanding the vision and the goal of the business. That's when you can say you have successfully did configuration. Configuration is not about SAP. It's about all these other things I've said. SAP is not the basis for configuration. It is laws, regulations, standards, business process, goals that should drive configuration, not the SAP consultant using SAP to drive configuration. So, these are conversations that are ongoing, and You're learning so that when you go out there, you're not just this siloed person who just sees configuration as no, it's far, far deeper than that. Now, and everything starts with enterprise structure. It's a system representation of an organization. Take note. Your enterprise structure represents the organization you're trying to design. It's not. So let me say it again. The system it is a system representation of the organization. So when you finish configuring a system, it should be in line with what the organization wants, because that system represents that company. So if you design a system that is not in line with the organizational structure or what the business really wants, you have not configured. So you see that configuration is deep. It is not about just going in there and just start running. No, you first have to know that anything you're designing should represent business requirements. When a project is centered or initiated, it starts with analyzing business structures. Again, business. So you see that configuration is not about configuring system. No, it's about business. Many people don't know this. Many people are just, we are consultant. We do certification. I mean, many people don't understand this level of detail that enterprise structure, which you will see in SAP, is not it's not my terminology. Just check. If you go to SAP and you go to SPRO, for example, which is where let me not go to SPRO, let me take you to the long cut. If you go to tools, go to customizing. Remember, we talked about customizing. Go to this is configuration. Go to SPRO. That's the project. And then this is enterprise structure. That's where everything starts. But this enterprise structure is a representation of the organization business requirements we're trying to build. So you need to go back again and read that document I sent to you about functional specification design. That is an example of what we're building or what we should be building. So we have said that, and we see it's also a project. It starts with analyzing business structure and processes in a company and then mapping them to SAP structures. I have ended this class with this comment. It starts with, number one, analyzing business structure. So when we're talking about business areas, profit centers, cost centers, look, those are the information you need to get from the business. You need to understand a business. So part of your requirement gathering, that's why that takes a lot of time. Fit to standard workshop, requirement gathering takes a lot of time, because when you talk about configuration, it starts with understanding the structure in the business. Start with understanding what the business does, how they do what they do, what is their org structure, what is the business operations, how do they, if they are service business, how do they carry their service? Well, it's a lot. I can't just keep saying it. And after you have analyzed the business structure, you have to now analyze the processes within that organization. What is their LOB, their line of business? Do they have finance? Do they have procurement? Do they have sales? How do they do sales? How do they do finance? How do they do this? How do they do that? It is when you have understood all this that you can now map it. So because it is when you have understood the structure and the process, you can now know that, in SAP, we have profit center. This will align with what they talked about, when we're doing the requirements in profit center. It's when you know, we have segments and they have different branches. I think, from the requirement gathering, we will use segments instead of using business areas. This is the intricacies with configuration, guys. So configuration is not just designing system. No. It is this. This is what configuration is. It starts with analyzing business structures and processes in a company and then mapping them to SAP structures. So like I've been saying that SAP is too when we in our last class when we talk about careers in SAP, I was emphasizing understanding business and understanding systems. You see why understanding business is important. And again, why understanding SAP is important because you have to map all you have gathered into SAP structures. So you need to also understand SAP structures, SAP organizational objects. That's what we call the structures. So we have business structure and we have organizational unit, which is SAP structure. It is bringing those two together that is configuration. So configuration is not a buzzword. Configuration is simple. We have business structures and processes, and we have SAP structures and organizational objects. So it is bringing these two together that is called configuration and customization. Ladies and gentlemen, so when you say you want to configure something, the first thing I ask you, do you know the business structure and processes? If you don't know, you're wasting your time with configuration. So that's why I took my time last time to really make you understand projects because it's in understanding business structures and processes. That's the only way you can configure a system. Otherwise, it's going to be a disaster. So if I remove this, if this is a building, this foundation for me here should be ABAP basis. This ground floor for me is SAP FICO. The ceiling, the roof can be can be our GUI. Let's say it's Fiori or GUI. The building services is MM. Sorry. The building services can be MM. The ceiling is sales and distribution. This one is CO. This one is just modules, functional modules, project systems, just like that. So you can see, and of course, the the roof is, you can see this an organizational objects. So you can see, this can give you an idea of what configuration is all about. It's bringing all these things together. But before you bring them together, you have to understand those two. Now, enterprise structure is the foundation. If you didn't learn SAP, if you just know that you see the enterprise structure and all those organizational objects is what you build on. So in the structure of modules, in the structure of SAP, let me also rewrite this structure. In the structure of configuration, you have clients, then another client, you have enterprise structure. And under enterprise structure, you have organizational objects. In under organizational objects, you now have FICU. That is the structure of configuration. everything you do will sit under enterprise structure. Enterprise structure are the bedrock of SAP FI solution. Without them, you couldn't integrate or configure your program. Guys, so it is not rushing to do configuration. It's rushing to understand organizational objects and enterprise structures. SAP has several organizational unit elements like, that help you portray accounting, logistics, sales and distribution and all that. Organizational units are client, operating concern, controlling area, company codes, sales organization, purchasing. All these are what we call organizational objects. They are the foundation of configuration. And whatever module you're doing in SAP, they all start with enterprise structure. So if you're in an interview and you say you configured system and you don't mention enterprise structure, they will know you're just a joker. If you don't talk about how you mapped business process and structures to enterprise structure and talk about the enterprise structures and flow down to finance, they will know you have never configured the system. So don't worry. That's why when people say there are no jobs, there are jobs. But a lot of people don't understand this basic information, basic details. And I trust you, even those who are currently on jobs don't understand it. Now, before we go, this is a structure of FICO. This is basically talking about FI and the core structures that sits on FI. So you can see it starts with enterprise structure and then flows down to the module, and module has substructures. We'll pick this when we start configuration, and this is the enterprise structure for controlling. Remember, we have FICO. So for finance, we have central finance, definition and assignments, financial accounting, global settings, GL accounting, accounts review and account payable, banking, US accounting, predictive accounting. In controlling, we have the operating concern, which is above controlling. Then we have controlling areas. We have the key, they're not all, but these are key controlling sub requirements. And of course, we'll take our time when we come next week to look at all these organizational units and what they are. And hopefully by next week, we're going to now start doing our configuration. So let me explain this org unit. So I'll record it so that you can go through it. A client, we have said, is the highest organizational level in SAP that represents a legal and technical independent environment. Company code, a legal accounting entity for which statutory financial statements are prepared. Chart of accounts, which we're going to see later, is a list of your GLs. Financial management area represents public sector and grants budgeting structure common for NGOs and public organizations. Controlling area, you can see the module that is under. Controlling area is under CO. It looks at the central organizational unit for internal cost accounting, not for external. So CO is management accounting for internal reporting. Allows cost controlling across one or more company codes using the same fiscal year and chart of accounts. So controlling is basically about cost accounting. Business area and optional reporting units used to create internal balance sheets and P&L. Profit center represents a responsibility area for revenue and cost control used for internal profitability reports and management performance tracking. Cost center represents where costs are incurred, used to control and analyze overhead and operational cost. Internal order, temporary cost objects used to track specific initiatives such as projects, events, and marketing campaign. Segment, a reporting entity aligned with IFRS 18, often mapped to profit center in SAP S/4HANA. Functional area used to classify costs by functions. Operating concern defines structures of profitability analysis, and so on and so forth. So these are structures, organizational objects in SAP that you need to go through, understand what they are, do more research, because in our next class, we will now start the configuration itself. So this is where we'll pick up next session. In next session, we will now start configuring. But please do me a favor, go through this session again, go through the FSD. So let me check FSD. Check if I kept it here. Okay, so go through this document I sent. Might not. No. Business blueprints. Yes. So go through this document I sent to you. From next week, I'm going to use it for some time, but not all the time. We'll just go through this document. So you see where they started in terms of their org structure. See, this is the org structure of the company. And you see, that's why we said, remember I said it is the org structure that you bring into SAP. So this is the org structure, this is the company, these are the company codes. And of course, these are business areas. You see, this company has business areas. They don't have segments, or they might have segments depending on how the requirement gathering has gone. So this was mapped after requirement gathering. So we had to now put in their structure. And this is the structure we're going to represent in SAP. And of course, we have the business process architecture, all the business process. Remember, we said that configuration is aligning business processes and structure to SAP structure. So these are all the business process structures that the company currently has. So we will replicate all these in SAP. I mean, hypothetically, it's not like we're going to follow it, end to end, because we don't have that time. So this is planning. These are for general ledger, one of the structures. These are the reports that we're expected to produce. This is for accounts payable. These are the reports and the responsible people who own these reports. This is business process mapping. So you see, for company, we have the company code. We have the company code. This is company, right? Not the company code. So for this company, we have this as a company for consolidation. For the company code, we have the company. For the chart of accounts, we have said that we're going to use 4-digit chart of account mapping structure. For business areas, these are all the business area we have. Based on requirement gathering, this is all the business area they have. You see now that business area is a unit of enterprise that groups product and market combinations for homogeneously as possible for the purpose of developing a unified business policy. So here, an original unit of financial represents a separate area of operation or responsibility within the organization. So it's separate within the organization. It's like a branch, and they hope that it will create financial statements. So that's why they chose business area instead of segments. Account groups, we're going to, of course, have the different GL account groups. So these are the range. So we have said assets should go from this to this, liabilities from this number to this number. So this is mapping our GLs to sit within different number ranges. But we'll see the concept of number range as we move on. Retained earnings, we have to define 2 retained earnings accounts, which we'll do. Fiscal year, we have a fiscal year. This is now March. This is what we call year end. This is what's the name now? it's an independent, like an independent. It's not a 12 months kind of structure. It's from January to March, so it will spill over to the next financial year. Of course, in the UK, that's how reporting happens. So basically, this is their fiscal year variance. It's not a calendar year; it's a non-calendar year. That's what I was trying to pick out. Then we have the posting period variance, which has been defined. This is a calendar, how we're going to mark. We have number ranges that we'll definitely copy. So these are the number ranges for all the major document types. We have the fee status variants. We have the tolerances. We have the tolerance group for employees. Exchange rate has been defined. So this is what I've said, that it is based on these documents that we design the system, because this has been documented, everything has been mapped, even mapped to how it's going to look like in SAP. Everything has been defined. This is an 81-page document. Everything has been defined, GL accounts, reversals. So this is a typical financial design document. So please, again, go through all the videos, go through this document, understand how this whole thing comes together. Because this document is we have aligned business process and structure to SAP structure. That's why in here you'll be seeing some terminologies in SAP, like financial statement version is an SAP structure. So the alignment has been done successfully and put in the document, in this functional design document. So if you want to really appreciate how this happens and how you need to go through the document, understand some of these terminologies, go through the video, also understand how SAP terminologies and how it works, and get ready for configuration from next week. I wanted to make sure that you had this foundation, because configuration will be quick. If I get into the system now, I can really configure if I can do end to end, in hours, a matter of hours. But for you, it will take some time. So giving you the foundation is very important. Nobody gave me all this really, even when I was learning. It wasn't this nice. But I feel that having come to these stages, even in my professional life, that it is good you expose people, empower them, give them what they want, and also motivate them to be able to do this, because it's not easy. I know some of us have a lot of commitments, but this is the only way. The only way is to go through the fire. You cannot go around it with SAP. In SAP, you have to go inside the fire, and SAP will burn you and refine you. Then you can now come out. You cannot go around it or stay by the side. You have to go inside it. It will now shape you up by late nights and give you a lot of errors that by the time you do it, then we will have what we call there, there's work coming for you guys, because my class is it's not for, that's why I don't chase anybody in SAP class. When we are done, we'll have what we call a transaction. It's a project we're going to have. It's called Train the Trainer. We have what we call the SAP S/4HANA Finance Challenge. You walk. This is an end-to-end transaction. First, you see some very beautiful slides, but this is where my interest is. You're going to, after configuring, you will go inside the system and do end user work. You will work. You will post transactions and post and make sure that you understand how users navigate through the system. So there is work coming. But before I throw you into the fire, I want to give you all the apparatus you need to come out of it unburnt. But if he burns you, you will learn and you will heal. But I want to give you everything. But like I said, learning SAP means you have to go through it. You go through the fire, it now refines you, and you now come out. Even when you come out, you still have to go through it, another fire, because it is a life of constant learning. So you keep building yourself until you just assume that you just feel that you have understood it. Then you can, once you can do your configuration and you can post transactions end to end, I think now you now do the technical training that will teach you how to troubleshoot errors, teach you how to write FSDs, teach you how to understand messages, how to interpret messages, teach you how to, teach you some more basic fields and tables and database within SAP. Then I can push you out there and tell you to go. And it will also not be easy in the market, but you'll have your options. You will have your options. So guys, I think this is the end of the class today. So just know that things are coming. I'd appreciate again if you would take some time, go through the classes again, go through the FSD document I shared, and soak yourself in SAP. That's the only way. Any questions? So we wrap up. Call it a day. Any questions, comments, so that we go? Are you guys there?
Yeah, we're here. Yeah, there's no question from my end.
No question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mike. Okay, thank you, Anayo. So yeah, I think Sam, Evie, any questions?